Hi there, welcome back to the Car UK channel and to this video. Sunday afternoon, and I thought, you know what, I will do a video that I've been meaning to do for a while. Basically talking about something that I get asked about a lot actually, which is the sort of cars that I don't buy and the reasons why I don't buy them, particularly certain types of cheaper vehicles that many people may consider. So I thought I'd do a video as to why I won't buy them, and hopefully some people might not go down the route of buying these vehicles mentioned in this list. Now, those who are new to the channel, I am a car dealer. I've been in the used car trade pretty much all my adult life in one form or another, and over the last year or so I've been running my own little dealership in Crewe in Cheshire, where I basically buy and sell vehicles under £5,000 retail, so the cheaper end of the market. It's an area that I know really well, particularly dealing with the cheaper end, and I also come to know all the problems and faults that can go wrong with some of these cheapy option vehicles that you might consider buying, because I haven't worked on them, or I've MOT'd them, or bought and sold them. I've come across so many bad cars, I thought it was about time that I shared some with you, give you some insight. So, let's kick off with some vehicles. Now, I am going to start with some French vehicles, in fact, two French cars. But I will say this, because French cars do get a kick in. There are plenty of decent French cars out there, so this is no means a sort of targeting of French vehicles. For every good French vehicle, there's a bad one, vice versa. Pretty much every manufacturer from every sort of country, even Germany, produces bad cars. So don't take it as I'm kicking French vehicles. Anyway, I thought that was worth mentioning. The first one I'm going to start off with, you should really avoid, like plague, is the Renault Scenic. I'm talking about the Renault Scenic Mk2. So this is a vehicle that ran from around 2000 and late 4, early 5, up until about 2009, when it turned to the Mark III. First thing I'll say is the Renault Scenic Mk1, which came out in the mid-90s, was actually a superb vehicle, and I'm not slating them for 1 minute, although most of them are probably off the road now, because obviously it's a long time ago. But the Renault Mk2 Scenic actually only went out of production about 14-15 years ago, and was an extremely popular car, and actually when it came out was actually really well received, and I remember dealing with them when they were pretty much new, and so I thought they were a fantastic family MPV. They also did the 7-seater Grand Scenic as well, and I'm sure anyone who owned one in those early days, the first few years, probably thought they were absolutely brilliant. However, when they got to a certain age, they were literally just falling to pieces. They were awful. Really sort of 6-7 years of age, you started to get loads of problems with them, and which is really why you hardly see any of them around anymore. Major things you used to worry about on those Scenic Mk2s were, the major one was the dashboard, so it used to have a problem with the speedo clocks. So the speedometer clocks used to basically just pack up randomly. Many of them had the clocks replaced by second-hand units, which you just plug in and away you go. However, the mileages were always wrong on them, or you had to put new ones in, start from zero. They were just awful things for breaking speedometers going wrong on them. Also electrical issues, like I say, windows were problematic on them, and one of the biggest ones was the electronic handbrake, electronic park brake. Pretty much everyone they ever come across, or certainly most of them, had an electronic handbrake fault when they got sort of 10 years of age. I used to buy them in the auctions, trading them on, and every so often you just get one with a knackered handbrake, and pretty much they were just scrap at that point, because literally they're so expensive to replace. I mean, I never found anyone who could actually fix them. When as soon as they went wrong, the only way to solve it was just replace the whole units. They were awful. They're terrible cars. The engines weren't up to much either. Some of the diesel engines, when they got high mileages, they just never seemed to last. You used to have to look for up a lot of check engine problem lights and injector fault lights, particularly the diesels I'm talking about here. The petrols weren't so bad, but there's just the other things around them. They just used to fall to pieces. They were not a good car and something you should avoid, and that's assuming you can find hardly any. Some do crop up now and then, but like I said, if you are looking for an MPV type vehicle like that, I definitely would not recommend the Scenic Mk2. It was an awful car. And say I will not buy them. I have traded them on, bought them and sold them on, making a little bit of money out of them, but the idea of retailing one sends a shiver down my spine. I will not touch them. Next vehicle that I will not touch is Citroen C4 Picassos. Now, these actually ran from around 2007 really up to about, I think it's about 2014, 15 when they changed to the later shape. Now, I don't know enough about the later shape, really. I haven't bought too many of those to be too critical of those, although I have heard some things bad about those, but I'll leave that for another day. Now, when the Mark 1 C4 Picasso came out, it was actually, again, quite well received, and I drove a few of these in the early days. A lot of them were automatics as well. Used to have a nice little American style handle on the side here where you could apply your drive, etc. Quite a nice thing to drive. A lot of them had diesels, 1.6 diesels and 2-litre diesels. They were petrol options, but the diesels were the most common, and the Autobox system was actually the most common as well. A lot more autos than there was manuals, which was a problem, which I'll come to in a minute. I will briefly say as well, actually, because I don't want, again, start slating French cars, and it's all about French cars. Again, it's another example of the previous model was a far better vehicle. The actual Citroen Picasso, the original Citroen Xara Picasso, which again became the Picasso, ran from about 2000 to 2009. Actually, both vehicles were actually in production at the same time. That was a brilliant vehicle, absolutely superb, and actually was a big player in that MPV market in the early 2000s. But however, they just got it wrong with the reliability front on the next model, the C4 Picasso. Again, first few years, you probably had no issues. A lot of people probably thought they were really decent who owned them. But time they got to sort of the 8 to 10 years of age, these Picassos were just falling to pieces. The main ones that used to be killer on it were the Autoboxes were going wrong. They used to have like a type of semi-tronic system, which effectively had a clutch system and a robotic system that applied the clutch in and out. They used to go wrong, or they'd start slipping or go faulty. You could change them, no issue. Parts were readily available to change them, but they had to be set up correctly. A lot of people, mechanics, didn't know how to do them, how to calibrate them afterwards. They were just an awful pig thing to work on. They used to suffer as well with engine faults. Some of the 1.6 HDI engines in the early days weren't that great. Again, that dreaded electric handbrake issues. I used to see a few of them with electronic handbrake issues, and general just electrical gremlins. I've generally, in all the years I've been doing this, never bought one, a C4 Picasso or a C4 Grand Picasso of a certain age, more than 10 years old, that I bought from auction, that hasn't had one of these faults on, or has, actually any made any money out of, which is why I won't deal with them. I won't touch them at all. I just keep it well away from them. And if someone ever brought one to me for a part X, I will really sort of, kick them really where in the proverbials, because they're just not something that I want. And the only thing you can really do with them is just basically trade them on or send them away to auction, because you just couldn't dare retail one of these vehicles knowing with all the faults that are there. The chances are it will just go wrong, and as a dealer you'll be paying out to have it fixed, or probably more likely actually giving the money back to the customer. So I just keep well away from them. So anyway, those are the two French cars on this list. However, I'm going to move on now to something a little bit more modern, although a cheap vehicles nonetheless that you can still pick up, and across different model platforms as well. I'm going to mention actually an engine this time. It's any vehicle fitted with the Ford 1 litre Ecoboost engine, one of my favourite subjects, the Ford 1 litre Ecoboost engine. There is a very good reason, as you can probably tell from my other videos, if you haven't checked them out, links in the description about the Ecoboost engine, why I will not buy these cars. The simple reason is because they run a wet belt system, they are unreliable. If you buy one, the chances are it's probably not had a belt done, and if they go wrong, which most of them do, you will basically just end up giving your money back to your customer, or having to repair it or put a new engine in. They are not reliable engines whatsoever, and that is the reason why I will just not touch them. You will go to an auction up and down the UK, no matter where you go. I can go to G3, I can go to Aston Barclay, I can go to an independent auction. You will always find Ecoboost 1 litre engines in there. They're fitted in the Fiesta, the EcoSport, the B-Max has them in as well. The Focus has them in. There's a few cars in the Ford range. They started in about 2012, the 1 litre, and is still used to this day, although it did have a bit of a change in 2019, although it still has a similar issue with the wet belt effectively degrading, falling apart, blocking the engine up, causing oil consumption and light problems as well. Without boring you too much, trust me on this one, do not buy one. If you are going to buy one, then wow, make sure you've got a warranty, make sure the belt's been replaced or it's had a replacement engine. That's realistically all you can do if you're thinking of keeping one of these long term. If you're unsure about how bad they are, go and check out some of the Facebook groups here, and you will soon change your mind about buying a Ford Ecoboost engine. They are not a good engine, and I would not recommend them to anyone. Like I said, I think I've sold one retail since I started at the car pitch just a year ago, and the only reason why I sold that one was because I bought it in actually as a trade vehicle. It was a bit of an error actually. Someone sold it to me and said it was a 1.6 petrol, and it turned out to be an Ecoboost Focus, but nonetheless, it was still drove fine, it was okay, but we actually took it apart and realised it actually had a replacement engine in it, so we decided to go on with it because the major fault on that car that could basically go wrong had been rectified, so we decided to retail it. But that is an extreme example of where I would actually been able to retail one. Other than that, you'd be having to change the belts on them, and they cost so much to do, it's just not viable, and you can't go and buy one, you know, with a margin probably of £800,000 you might have in a vehicle, and then go spend £700 or £800 having to change the belt. It's just, they're just not viable. So I just don't buy them. at all. They're not good vehicles, and they're not reliable, so don't buy 1 litre Ecoboosts. Now, another common vehicle that you'll still see on our roads, and one I will not buy, is the Vauxhall Insignia. And I'm talking about the Mark 1 Vauxhall Insignia. I have sold Mark 2 Vauxhall Insignias. They can throw a few issues up, but again, they're still quite new. But the Mark 1 Vauxhall Insignia in the price band that I'm looking at, so again, you're looking at cars from 2 to sort of 5 grand now, 8, 9, 10-year-old vehicles, example of retail money. They are not particularly great vehicles in my view. Now, I'm going to criticise mostly the 2-litre diesel engine. From 2009, the Insignia started. They also did a 1.8 petrol engine, which I'll come back to in a minute. Most of them you'll find are diesels. When they get to sort of 10 years of age, they are literally just falling to pieces, these things. They are a Fiat-derived engine that they use in them, and it actually drives very well when they run right, but a lot of them don't. They suffer with gearbox issues, the bearings go faulty in the gearboxes, so literally, one of the ways to find out this in the manual gearbox is you put it in gear in first gear, start the car up, lift the clutch up slowly so you get a bite point. You're not driving off, just get a little bite as soon as you've got the bite point, and look at the gear stick. And I'll try and put an example here if I can find one. And the gear stick will actually move backwards and forward. That's a sign of faulty bearings in the gearbox. They're really common. The engines were rubbish when they got to a certain age and used to fall pieces. Injectors were problems. Cam belts would snap. In fact, I had one snap on me just recently, about 18 months ago. Bought a vehicle from Aston Barclay, drove through the auction absolutely perfectly, bought it at 900 quid. I thought brilliant. I thought this is a brilliant buy, bargain. Bear in mind, I was still skeptical about Insignias then, but just got caught in the moment and bought this Insignia, got it out of the auction, drove fine, put it on the car park, no issue. I even sold the car on the phone to another trader, saying here's what it is, sent me the pictures, blah blah blah. 500 quid wages in it without even having to retail it, which I wouldn't have dared done anyway. Went straight up the road in it on the way back to my then unit, and within about 500 yards, the cam belt literally just snapped on it. Literally just snapped 500 yards from the auction house. So they're just not particularly great vehicles. They don't particularly drive well either, in my view. I think a Passat or an A4 drives far better than one of them Insignias. I think even the Mondeo actually drives better than an Insignia. So I just cannot rate them at all. So there's so many issues with them of a certain age. Later ones, some of the VX line ones and stuff like that, yeah, okay, fair enough. You know, if they're a bit newer, you might be all right. But honestly, when they get to sort of 10 years of age, they are just literally just falling to pieces. There's some cars that just last well. The Vauxhall Insignia is not one of them. Quickly mention the 1.8 Insignia before I move on to the next vehicle. I have sold 1.8 petrol Insignias purely because the engine I know quite well, and to be fair, they're not as unreliable as the diesels. I do not go looking for them. I would not look to buy one in an auction, but if I got offered one, it was cheap money, I probably would buy a petrol 1.8 petrol one, but I just keep away from the diesels. Next things on my list that I will not buy and I would not recommend anyone to buy is any vehicle fitted with the 1.2 Puretech engine. Now this is fitted mostly to Citroens and also Peugeots and also Vauxhalls. Now on the Vauxhalls is a lot later on, but in the earlier Citroen Peugeots from around 2012 onwards, they were fitted with 1.2 litre Puretech engines. They did also do a 1 litre version in the Citroen C3 and I think it was 208 as well, I think, very briefly for a few years, but they are quite rare. Most of them faded away, and the 1.2 was the one that succeeded. All different power bands from, you know, about 80-90 brake horsepower all the way up to sort of 150 odd brake plus you can get them in now. Now the 1.2 Puretech engine is a 3-cylinder engine. It's very similar in sort of design to the 1 litre Ecoboost used in the Ford, i.e. it's a wet belt derived 3-cylinder engine with a turbocharger fitted. It also suffers with the same problems which is faced with the Focus up until, well, literally a couple of years ago when they changed it. But the wet belt system is there, it breaks, it fails, it clogs the engine up. It's the same problem as you get in the Ecoboost. But also, unlike the Ecoboost, it goes one further with other issues such as having oil consumption problems. These 1.2 Puretech engines just seem to guzzle oil. When you get one that starts basically burning oil all the time, you'll never cure it. I say I've seen 17, 18 plates in some of the Vauxhalls, Peugeot, Citroens, spewing out smoke when I've been MOTing them, or I've seen them in garages where they've gone failed and gone faulty, and the stuff that's only done like 50, 60,000 miles, or they've started using far too much oil. In fact, even even someone who does some work for me is driving currently a 1.2 petrol Puretech Vauxhall Grandland, which is what this engine also fitted to, some of the Vauxhalls later on, and they are experiencing the same problem when it comes to oil consumption. And like I said, it's the same problem. These engines are notorious for this oil consumption problem and also wet belt failure. I would not recommend anyone to buy any of the Peugeot Citroens or the Vauxhalls, later Vauxhalls, sort of 16, 17 onwards, the Vauxhalls with this engine in. Now, they have made revisions to the engine about 18 months ago. One of the major ones, they got rid of the belt, so it's no longer a wet belt, it's a chain, and some other adaptations as well. So we're yet to see if it's cured those issues. The jury's still out on that one. But in the meantime, I just will not buy them at all, which is a real shame because there are some fantastic Peugeot Citroen products and Vauxhall products out there with that 1.2. But I just don't want to risk retailing one of those to a customer and it goes wrong on them. Just don't want to have that problem. Although I will say this on the wet belt issue, to change a wet belt on a 1.2 Puretech, so you could buy one, change the belt, that is a far easier, cheaper thing to have done than it is on the Ecoboost. You can change a wet belt on a Puretech engine in a few hours. On Ecoboost, it takes you like 8-9 hours. So it's a lot more simpler job to do on the 1.2 Puretech, so we'll give it that. Moving on, the next car that I would not recommend you buy is the Fiat Bravo. Now, this is a Fiat Bravo that ran from, I think it was around 2007. I think it went all the way up to about 2014. It was then replaced by the Tipo, but really by sort of 2011-12, it pretty much ended production, really. They sold a few after that, but like I said, it had heyday was between sort of 2007 and 2011-12. Now, you don't see many of these Bravos around anymore, and there's a good reason for that, because most of them have fallen to pieces, and they did sell quite a lot of them. Now, I have sold Bravos in the past, but usually it's probably just like 1.4 bog standard petrol models. Everything else seems to just fall to pieces, and even the 1.4 petrols used to give me so many problems. Literally just everything used to fall off them. Door handles used to fall off the damn things, bits of trim would fall off them, electrical issues, the windows would pack up or break, or the regulators would fall to pieces. They were really poorly made. The engine lineup was not particularly brilliant, although they did have some really tasty engines, which were great if you were buying them in the early days. The diesels were very good to drive. They used to run 1.9 diesel engines, very similar to get in the Vauxhall Vectras. In fact, they were same engines you got in the Vauxhall Vectras, 120 brake, even 150 brake diesel versions, which were absolutely rapid when they were running right. However, that wouldn't last long, because usually after about 4 or 5 years, the engines would just fall to pieces. Swirl flat manifold faults on the 1.9 diesel was common. Injector faults were common. Blowing turbos were common. Gearbox issues again were common. They did a petrol lineup as well. They did some 1.4 turbo petrol versions, which were brilliant to drive, but again used to just fail, go wrong. Engine faults, turbocharger faults, smoky engines. They were just not a great reliable car whatsoever. Like I said, I'm sure if you bought one new, it'd been great, but after 7 or 8 years of age, they were just fit for the bin. I don't know what it was. Every single one I used to buy, all the exhausts were always falling off them. Like I said, numerous amounts of trim bits. Used to spend so much money repairing them. In the end, we just basically just stopped selling them. They just weren't worth the hassle. So don't buy those. They are awful vehicles. If you compare something like of a similar ilk, bear in mind these cars were made in 2009, 10, 11, and most of them are, like I said, have fallen to pieces. Ford Focus wasn't doing that. They were pretty well built cars. They're not having the same problems. Astra H's and J's. The Astra J's are a little bit finicky, but the Astra H was a well put together car. They didn't suffer with those problems. It was just poor design and poor build quality. Not a good car. I cannot recommend those to anyone. Do not buy one of those. And again, before someone starts typing in, well, all Italian cars like that, they're rubbish. There actually are some really good Italian cars, Puntos in particular. Some of the earlier Puntos, the Mark II Punto was a pretty decent car. You still see loads of them on the road. I'm not always saying that Italians make the best cars, but they certainly make some of the prettiest cars, and they can occasionally make a reliable one, but the Fiat Bravo was not one of them. Now, moving on, the next one I'm going to talk about, which is not a buy and should avoid like the plague, is the Ford Powershift boxes. So this is an automatic transmission box, which is fitted to numerous amounts of Fords. Started about 2008-9, they started fitting these power box units, or power shift units, sorry, and it's pretty much up to the present day, really, or to a few years ago, certainly. The power shift boxes were fitted in things like the Focus and the Mondeo and the Fiesta, diesels and petrols, Galaxies as well, S-Maxes, pretty much all the Ford lineup. The power shift box from Ford is not a reliable Autobox in my view, and you only have to go online and start researching it to find out how many people would agree with that statement. The reliability is awful, to say the least. Every time you go to an auction, you will find Ford automatics in there, faulty boxes in them, not running right. Dealers, I've always come across dealers who are moaning about Ford power shifts, and on the groups and some of the forums I'm on, they're always trying to find out who can repair them and fix them. And the fact that there's so many Fords out there, and this is pretty much the main Autobox they've ran for the last 15 or so years, inevitably you're going to come across one, and inevitably by buying them, you're going to run into one that's going to fail very quickly. So if you start going buying one of these tomorrow, start buying a handful of them, I guarantee you'll be burnt by car number 3 you buy. They're just not great at all, and they're really costly to fix as well. I mean, the box is that bad. They've had legal action threatened against them in the United States over this box. I think they got fined as well, about $10 million in Australia, for basically customer service issues regarding this box and how they were dealing with customers who were basically being peed off and buying these cars with Powershift boxes in, and the way they were dealing with customers and the way they were dealing with the warranty side of it, and they say the government just fined them. It's just not a box that you could recommend to someone, and I've told plenty of people when they're going to go buy an automatic vehicles and they start mentioning the word Ford and automatic, I say don't buy the Powershift box. They certainly did do alternatives to those boxes. You have to do your research on them because they are few and far between. People say that the later versions of the box are better. I don't know enough of those because I don't buy those later models, but really anything from sort of 2008-9, which Powershift really up to 16-17 plate, I'm still seeing issues with those boxes, and in fact I've seen some even later than that, so I cannot recommend them to anyone. There are plenty of better automatic boxes out there in other vehicles. I would go look at those and keep away from the Ford Powershift. Now, the next one on my list is the 1.4 turbocharged Vauxhall engine fitted to things like the Corsa, the Mokka, the Astra, and the Vauxhall Zafira. Started life roughly around 2011-ish. I saw them first in the Astras, the Astra J, the 1.4 turbo unit, and it was used until a few years ago, until they replaced them with the Puretech engine. Now, you can argue which one's worse. Probably, well, I'm not quite sure. Really. That's we're asking, you want your left leg taken off or your right leg taken off? But let's just focus on the 1.4 because I've already mentioned about the Puretech. The 1.4 turbo petrol engine, again, when you first drive them for the first probably 5, 6, 7, 8 years, they're probably actually all right. As I've driven a few of them actually, so I know they're all right. They do pull really well. However, the engine is not great when they start racking up the miles. I've had a few of these and I've bought them as well. They seem to suffer with turbocharger failure. I've had them where the egg gaskets have gone on them. It seems to make it worse. The fact that they've obviously got a turbo on there, more pressure on that engine, being ragged about a bit as well. Obviously, it's assisting the engine, and it's been put into larger vehicles like the Zafira and the Mokka as well. It just really is a bit too much of a strain for such a large vehicle, in my view. Also built on the back, or loosely built on the back, of a Vauxhall Corsa engine, which is not the most reliablest when it comes to it anyway, sort of with chain problems, egg gasket issues itself. And then to whack a great big turbocharger on it and put it under more strain is just asking for disaster. I see far too many of them with, like I said, cylinder head gasket issues, chains falling off them, turbochargers going funny on them, all sorts of breather issues and stuff like that, rough running, idle problems, and you never seem to be able to get them right. When they start playing up, they just never seem to go right again. So they are just an awful thing, and I just don't want to deal with them. And it's a shame really, because you can see a lot of these Vauxhalls with this engine fitted, but I just cannot buy them and in confidence sell them to a customer and expect them to get good reliability out of them, because they just will not, in my view. Particularly, like I said, when they get sort of past 60, 70,000 miles, they just seem to be all falling to pieces, so I keep well away from those. I will buy the 1.4 standard petrol engine, which is a Corsa base engine. I'm not saying it's top of the tree on reliability, it can have issues itself, but it's certainly a lot better than the turbocharged version. And finally on my list today, something that I get offered quite a lot actually, these, and you should be surprised because there isn't that many of them left, but I always probably get offered one, maybe every 2 or 3 months someone will offer me one, whether it's trade or one at the auctions. Someone will come in and people ask, why have you not bought that, etc. I've even offered one in Part X just recently, which I turned down, which is a Jaguar X Type, and particularly we're talking about the diesel version. Now, I do have a soft spot for the Jaguar S-Type, which was started actually a few years before the X-Type. The X-Type came out in about 2001, if I remember rightly, and ran up to 2009, then replaced by the XF. Now, the diesel engines they used in those Jaguar X-Types was the 2-litre diesel and 2.2-litre diesel, which come out of the Ford Mondeo. The Jaguar X-Type suffers with huge problems, which I've seen countless times when it comes to MOT. They suffer with horrendous suspension problems, which are really expensive to fix and get hold of. They suffer with huge corrosion problems, particularly on the sills. The sills have got great big covers over them that seem to cover up all the sills. You can't really see what's going on, but effectively underneath that cover, you'll just find your sill is just annihilated and rotten rotting away. They were terrible for it. I say pretty much everyone you get of a certain age now is going to have a rotten sill or been repaired. It can get up to the doors and the inner parts of the arches as well. They're just not particularly well built, and the corrosion, like I said, is appalling on them. Strap back to the diesel engines, which in my view were not the most finest of things for a Jaguar anyway. The 4 diesel engines they use, those 2 litres and 2.2 diesels, used to suffer with dual mass problems as well. About 60,000-70,000 miles of dual masses would pack up on and rattle, or in some cases would collapse. These suffer with injector faults, which weren't the end of the world to fix. You could get enough injectors and program them in and away you go, but it was very common. They just weren't, in my view, a particularly great all-round package. People seem to think they're worth fortunes, these diesel Jaguar X Types. Far from it. I just get offered them a lot still. Even now, people think they're worth a lot of the money, and they're just not. They're not something that I want to buy. They're all rotten to pieces, half of them. They're just not a great investment at all, even. I don't even think they're even going to be much of a good classic going forward. A really nice petrol one. They were 4-wheel drive, the petrol ones as well, the 2.53 litre petrols. Yes, you can argue they may be something to keep hold of, if you can keep it from rotting away, that is. But not something that I really rate at all. They also did a 2.1 petrol, which is quite interesting. I did actually own one of those very briefly, although briefly was the word. The S-Type I quite rate, actually. I did quite like the S-Types, although they did rot. I'm not saying they didn't rot, but they weren't as bad, in my view, as those X-Types. And the S-Type was just a nicer looking car. Yeah, so don't buy a Jaguar X-Type. If someone offers you a nice Jaguar X-Type diesel, look, they might look the part, but honestly, you will regret it. Don't buy one. Anyway, there's a few examples of some of the vehicles and powertrains that I will not buy. This list is by no means a full list. I've probably missed out a few vehicles, but that's the ones that I can remember on a Sunday afternoon. So if anyone's got any views on that, let me hear it in the comments. And if you've got any suggestions as well of vehicles that you think as well are just as bad and should be on my list, let me know, and I'll see if I'll agree or disagree with you on that one. But there we go. Thank you for watching this one. I hope it's been some help to someone. If anyone's offered you a Jaguar X Type diesel rate lately, or a Citroen C4 Picasso, and you're thinking about buying it, well, you know now not to bother. Thanks again, guys, for watching this one. If you like this sort of motor trade content, then obviously the best thing to do is like and subscribe. Add yourself to the subscriber list and make sure you get all the latest content as it lands. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all very soon.